Hey everybody, welcome to this video, much requested, and here it is. I'm going to talk to you about which poems compare well with which other poems in the love and relationships cluster. I was a bit reluctant to make this video because in some ways you can compare any two poems. They're all in the same cluster of love and relationships, so there are some lines of comparison between all of them. But I do think I can help you out with some interesting things in this video. But to get the highest level, the level 6, what we're talking about is a conceptualized response. Now I go through this in my ebook, my guide to English literature, which is £3.99 at mrbruff.com. So if you do enjoy these videos, please do pick up a copy. But what do we mean by a conceptualized response? Well, what we mean is that you have an idea and you use the poems to illustrate that idea. You've got a convincing critical argument based on your own concept. Now for me, because this is around a 45-minute exam, I think the best line of argument to have is a two-sided argument. I'm going to go through some examples, but make sure you're subscribed to the channel because I'm going to briefly mention the pairs of poems in this video, but in upcoming videos I'll go through each one in more detail, okay? But what I mean is to have a two-sided argument. So let me give you an example. I would compare Walking Away and Mother Any Distance, okay? Because I think they have a similarity, but they also have a difference. The similarity is that they're both about the growing distance in parent-child relationships. Okay, they're from alternating perspectives. So in Walking Away, it's parent to child. Mother Any Distance, it's child to parent. So there's a similarity. But the second point, that my two-pronged line of argument here, would be that actually there are varying degrees of optimism about this growing distance in the relationship. I think Walking Away, the speaker grows to an optimistic sense of closure. Mother Any Distance is not so sure whether it's a good thing or not. So my 45-minute exam response would be based on, firstly, explaining for about half of that time, about 20 minutes, the growing distance, the similarity in the growing distance between the relationships. So in Walking Away, I might write about the metaphor of autumn in leaves just turning and how that shows a change in the relationship, how it's dying. I might talk about the caesura, the structural feature which makes you stop and shows the kind of stop in the relationship. In Mother Any Distance, I might use the fact that it is loosely based on a sonnet and how the way it doesn't conform to the sonnet form, which is all about love poetry, reflects the distance, and also the extended metaphor throughout the whole poem about the measuring tape and the distance between the speaker and the mother, and the kind of physical distance as a metaphor for relational distance. So I'd spend about half of my time exploring that similarity. But then I would spend the other half of my time on the second line of argument, which is that there is a positive ending in Walking Away and a not so positive ending in Mother Any Distance. So I would talk about the ending of both poems actually being really significant. The biblical imagery at the end of Walking Away suggests that it's the right thing to do. The fall or fly imagery at the end of Mother Any Distance questions whether it's the right thing to do, because you might fall or you might fly. There's not such a sense of things are going to go brilliantly well. So what I'm suggesting is a two-pronged line of argument for each comparison, and that's how I would choose which poems to compare, which poems compare well, because it helps you to think of a conceptualized response, to ignore the early instinct, oh, that's a sonnet, this one's a sonnet, I'll compare them, but to actually think of a concept. Both of them, and that would be my introduction then, a one-line introduction. Walking Away and Mother Any Distance present a growing distance in parent-child relationship, but Walking Away is much more optimistic, whereas Mother Any Distance is very unsure of the outcome, or something like that. Then straight into it. I think for me, that's about what I could do in 45 minutes, this sort of two-pronged approach. So I'll whiz through the poems that I would compare. Now, you can use this idea of the conceptualized response, the two-pronged argument, and you can choose any poems you like to go with it, okay? So this is just a suggestion. Winter Swans and Neutral Tones. What do they both do? They both present unhappy relationships with the use of imagery of nature. But Winter Swans has an ending that is positive and optimistic, with the seeing the swans and then holding hands and things are turning out well, and the structure of how the poem ends. Neutral Tones does not. I'm going to go through that in more detail in a future video, so do make sure you're subscribed. I would probably compare Eden Rock and Follower. They are both about parent-child relationships that have a distance between them. Okay, so a distance that is literal or metaphorical, depending on how you interpret the poem. But I would say that one is more positive than the other. Eden Rock is certainly more optimistic and glowing about the parent than Follower is. And again, I've got points on language and structure and form that I would use to make those points. I'm not just writing about the plot or the narrative of the poem. I'm writing about that theory, backing it up with language, structure and form. Singsong and Sonnet 29. I think Singsong's a tricky one to compare, but I think it's a very, very positive poem. So I think I would compare these two because they're both romantically wonderful. So that's the line of similarity, but they have obstacles to overcome. Now, in this analysis, there are actually two things that they both do, but it's still a two-pronged argument. So I would explore how the relationship is so great, the sonnet form, the repetition, the religious language, the value imagery of silver, whatever. And then I would explore what is the challenge that is in the relationship. And obviously, Sonnet 29, he's not there with her, which is that challenge is represented through the fact that the stanza, the sonnet turn straddles lines 7 and 8, showing that there's a problem in this otherwise perfect relationship. What's the problem in Singsong? Well, on a plot level, it's that she's upstairs, but I would want to write about it's a cultural challenge, and I would talk about the two meanings of Putney. So please don't get too confused about what I'm saying here. Think, what are you on about? I explain all of these things in the individual poetry analysis, and I will go through all of these things in more detail, but I just want to give you an overview. I would probably compare Letters from Yorkshire with Sonnet 29 as well. I think we've got these distant relationships. It's about the impact of distance on relationships. They both use the imagery of nature and they both use the imagery of religion. You could say that there's a growing warmth in Letters from Yorkshire because it starts off by writing about the man as he, but it moves to you, but that intensity of passion was there from the beginning in the sonnet. I think of thee, exclamation mark. I would then compare When We Two Parted with Walking Away, and you'll see there's some overlap here. You say, well, I've already compared Walking Away with something, but obviously if When We Two Parted is the named poem, you need to think about what to compare it to. Both of these poems are about changing relationships, but again, Walking Away comes to terms with it as a positive, and When We Two Parted really does not. Love's Philosophy and Porphyria's Lover, they're both about longing and desire in a relationship, but Love's Philosophy is essentially persuasive, trying to persuade, directed to the woman, and Porphyria's Lover is very passive. We never hear the woman's voice, and of course that ties in with the sort of sinister what's going on and that kind of thing. Climbing My Grandfather I would probably compare with Follower. They're both about loving relationships with older relatives, but I think there's a sense in Climbing My Grandfather that the speaker grows closer to his grandfather, whereas the relationship in Follower drifts further apart, and with the father kind of following after him in his shadow who won't go away. So whether you choose to match up these pairs or not, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a significant thing going on. The significant thing going on is I'm trying to choose poems which have a line of argument, almost a two-pronged analysis that I could use. Before You Were Mine and The Farmer's Bride, I think they both present possessive relationships, but one is seen to be normal in the society of the time. It's the expected way a relationship would be. In The Farmer's Bride, represented perhaps through the natural imagery, suggests that it's natural, lots of imagery of nature. Before You Were Mine, you could argue, is an abnormal relationship, presented through an abnormal possessive nature, presented through the inversion of what we would normally expect for a mother to talk about a child as, you were mine, not the child to talk about the parent. Look for comparison points where you could have a two-pronged attack. You don't then compare these in terms of plot. You back up your ideas with points of language, structure and form, but you've got to have that conceptualized response for the highest marks. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.